I'm as happy as a schoolgirl. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Howdy, I was probably about 8 years old the first time I remember being exposed to Charles Dickens, and it would be asterisked because I think my very first exposure had Uncle Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge was played by a duck, Uncle Scrooge. Tiny Tim was a very small mouse. Bob Cratchit was Mickey Mouse. There was a lot of other animals in it, and it was a Disney production, Mickey's Christmas Carol. That was the first one that I actually remembered. And for years, that was my version of Scrooge, was that from that show, Ebenezer Scrooge. I'm sure I saw some of the black and white movies, which I'll talk about here in a minute. I'm sure I saw some of them, not by choice. They might have been on TV. I have a vague recollection of Christmas Eve at my grandmother's house, staying up late, watching the Alastair Sim version of A Christmas Carol. The only reason I watched it was because I was being allowed to stay up later than I normally would, so I would have watched anything to be able to stay up. She was watching it, so I was watching it, and I didn't have to go to bed, so I watched that, but I didn't like it. That was pretty much my experience with Charles Dickens' story up until my early 20s. Somehow I decided to give the 1935 version of the film starring Seymour Hicks a shot, and I became a big fan. It was like a whole new world for me. That version of the movie, maybe it's unpopular to say so, but it's probably still my very favorite to date. And the reason being, Seymour Hicks was a phenomenal version of Scrooge. He was truly a miser. He was a miserable old man that made people around him miserable. There was almost nothing you could find in him that was likable. And as he went through the story and finally found redemption, he wasn't all of a sudden now a wonderful, lovable character. He was still that guy who found redemption. So you could still see some of those characteristics in him, but now he was a happier, kinder person. And when his redemption occurred, I loved it. Also in that movie, I don't know the guy's name, but he played Bob Cratchit. For me, he was the perfect Bob Cratchit. He was a small fellow, no outgoing personality at all, no strength or alpha type in his character whatsoever. Very passive, he would do what he's told. He did have some resistance to him, but at the end he was always going to bow down. He tried very hard to make life good for his family, but in that film, he showed you what hopelessness was, knowing that you weren't going to make anything. That if your family was going to survive, it was going to be by the grace of God, and it wasn't because life was going to improve for him. But he would still show hope, mostly to help his family take heart and to have hope. And that, like I said, today that's still probably my favorite version of the film. But to move on, today I want to talk about the book, some of the movies. I want to talk about some of the versions of that book that I have. To get started, I'd watched the Mickey's Christmas Carol. Then in my 20s, I watched the 1935 version starring Seymour Hicks. It was called Scrooge. I loved it, and somebody told me, well, shoot, if you like that, you gotta watch the version with Alastair Sim, 1951, and I did, and I loved it. And I would say probably, if I was going to judge a movie based on a movie being great, the 1951 version is the best version of that story ever told on film. Very good movie from top to bottom. Alastair Sim was a phenomenal actor, did very well. There was nothing about that movie that I disliked. It just, that 1935 version to me felt cold, I felt that I was there. I felt the hopelessness of Bob Cratchit. I felt the coldness. I felt the pain, the despair. I felt a lot of that stuff when watching the movie. And then when Scrooge found his redemption, I also felt some hope. I mean, and that's what the story is all about, is hope and redemption. Now, anyway, I'd watched a lot of the versions of the movie. I loved George C. Scott's portrayal of Scrooge. I'm a big fan of George C. Scott. And while he made Scrooge George C. Scott, I still liked it. I liked a lot of the stuff that I assume he came up with. Some of the lines and some of the characterizations that he played. I liked that he showed cracks in his character right off the bat. I felt at times that he would feel those tender moments, and I can tell he felt it. Those tender moments in the Ghost of Christmas Past, and he was looking at that. But that he, in his mind, had justified the way he was so strongly that he could easily show those tender feelings, but immediately go right back into himself, because he knows that this is the right way to do it. He was smart. He said things that wasn't a part of the story, wasn't a part of the book. For example, Bob Cratchit wanting a lump of coal so he could reignite his fire to warm up. And George C. Scott's Ebenezer Scrooge brought up the fact that a coat is durable. It will keep you warm over and over and over, where a lump of coal is just waste. You're going to burn it, it's gone. So some of that stuff was neat, and I like that version of the film a lot. The 1938 version, I can't remember the guy's name. It was good also. They really took liberties with the story, adding things in there that weren't there in a big way. Where Bob Cratchit hit Scrooge with a snowball on accident, knocked his hat off, which got run over. Scrooge, not only did he sack Bob Cratchit, but he took his back pay and more to pay for the hat, because his hat was worth more than Cratchit made in a week's wages, and then some. And then other versions of the film that I like a lot. Also the Muppets Christmas Carol had some neat stuff in it, some neat songs, but it was a big sway or a big drift away from the film. Now, this year, for the first time, I literally told myself I have no need to ever read the book. I've seen so many versions of the film, I know it back and front. Every year I'll watch 2 or 3 at least versions of the film every year after Thanksgiving, sometimes before Thanksgiving. But I stumbled across a copy of the book at a bookstore and said, well, shoot, I'll read it. I'll just put it on the list and I'll read it. And when I read it, I realized how dumb I was. I saw some great versions of the film, and the 1935 version starring Seymour Hicks was relatively close to the book. But when reading Charles Dickens' story, I found a magic that I'd never found before. And I think the magic lies in the narration, which is kind of lost in all of those film portrayals. Many of them have the dialogue word for word in scenes, but it was the narration that made that story special in Dickens' book. And I think it helped to serve. Dickens was telling a ghost story, a story that on the surface should be scary, that it would be a horror story. But in his narrations, he had a whimsical way of telling the story that when you read it, it is a ghost story, but it's not a horror story. It's a fun story. He'd have a way of telling of some of these bad things and making it feel a little bit lighthearted in the way he would tell the story. And then the redemption of Scrooge. Scrooge's redemption is the whole important thing this story gets across. But in the redemption, you really felt it. You felt that this guy was different. You felt that he was not just different towards Christmas, that he was not just different towards Tiny Tim, or even Bob Cratchit, that he was a changed person, that he found what really mattered in life, that he found what really should bring joy, and that joy mattered. That it's not just about how much you can accumulate to fend off the fear of the world getting to you. It's about enjoying life as you go, and being good to people is certainly the best way to enjoy life, and that the book really got that part across. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I'd like to show some of the editions that I have. So I've got a couple editions from the Folio Society. This is the most recent one I got this year. I can't remember the price, but it was a relatively affordable edition, and I love the way it looks. It didn't come with a slipcase. It's one of their, they've got a different collection. I don't remember what it's called, but they've got a collection that's economically priced, no slipcase. I think it might be the only Folio Society book that I have that's not slipcased. But I loved the way it looked, and I didn't really know what to expect when I got it in hand, but when I got it, I was pleased. So this is the latest version of the story from the Folio Society. And this one here, I can't remember what the printing is, but Folio Society will typically put the printing in there, so I'll get to it and see what we got here in a minute. It's got some of the classic artwork. This one is the fourth printing, 2020. And so it is. I've got another Folio Society version that is older. I'm just looking for some of the artwork in here. A little bit different than the artwork that's in some of my other editions. But the artwork, as usual with the Folio's artwork, it does help to tell a story. Here's just looking for a couple more. And here's Marley appearing at Scrooge's door. That's one thing about the 1935 version of the film with Seymour Hicks. It's probably definitely, as far as movies go, of the big ones, it's the most closest to the book. They all took liberties, but it's closest to the book. But one thing that after reading the story and then watching the movie again, they didn't show Marley's ghost. They hid it. And later I read, well, recently after I noticed that, I read that they did it for budgetary reasons, is the theory. They couldn't afford to have the high-tech special effects of the 30s that you might have seen in later versions of the film. So they just kind of left it out. They would have Ebenezer talking to a ghost that appears off screen, and you wouldn't get some of that stuff that might have cost money at that time. But the other versions some of them did a really good job of showing Marley's ghost and some of that stuff. And I think if anybody would knock the 1935 version of the film, that's what they would be knocking. One of the things they would knock. So here's my newest version of that story from the Folio Society. I recommend it. I love their stuff. When I buy from them, I typically will try to get multiples, so it helps with the shipping. And you got the spray on the top there, which adds to it. Buy multiples because it helps with the shipping from UK to the United States. And in a minute here, I'll show you my other Folio Society, the older version of the book. But a couple more versions of, don't drop that, of A Christmas Carol that I have that I like a lot. The only thing is I don't know who published these jokers. This one here I bought on eBay. They call it a facsimile. I assume that means it's very similar or a copy of how this book originally appeared. No dust jacket. I want to say perhaps a fake leather. I don't know. Maybe it's real. And this one I lost a card. But one of the interesting things about this one is it's got an inscription from a previous owner. Says Merry Christmas from your mother and father, 12/25/1980. So Merry Christmas from your mother and father in 1980. And it came with a little card from somebody cared and gave this book as a gift, and then later on down the road I ended up with it. This one is limited 1,598 of 5,000. And it does, as a facsimile, it has reprints of some of the original artwork. And this one, I truly love this image. Dear old Fezziwig. You'll see some familiar stuff in a lot of versions of this book. I've got another facsimile similar to this one. And let's see if I can pull up some more artwork. Marley's Ghost. Here we go. Marley's Ghost. Now, I said that their narration really made this book. There were some other differences that I think I like better in the book. It left some things up to the reader to imagine. First of all, there's a lot of folks that or a lot of talk and allusions that Ebenezer Scrooge's dad sent him away to a boarding school because Scrooge's mother died during childbirth, and he hated him for that. Well, the book doesn't tell you that. I think that's a conclusion that people might jump to, and maybe there's information outside of the book that talks about that. I don't know, but in the book it doesn't tell you that. It just says he's off in this boarding school, and his sister, Fem, whom I don't remember her name, Fam. Sorry, she comes and tells him, "Hey, father is different. He's much kinder and gentler, and we were talking about you, and he wants you to come home." And Scrooge was happy to come home, and the schoolmaster was angry that Scrooge was leaving, so it alludes to the fact that maybe there was some friction. Maybe it almost came off to me reading the book that Ebenezer Scrooge might have been some trouble for his dad, and his dad sent him to boarding school, and he might have been some trouble at school, as the schoolmaster was angry as Scrooge was able to go home. It was almost like he didn't like the fact that Scrooge was going to get something good. I've heard allusions to things that were maybe sexual in nature, or that Ebenezer's father hated him because his mother died in childbirth and stuff like that, but I didn't get that out of the book. Another thing, I believe that Fem was for Ebenezer Scrooge, she was the one thing that he truly loved, that wasn't selfish. To him, she was wonderful. He loved her, truly did. And when she died, it was the one good thing that he had that was now gone. He couldn't see anything else that was good, besides his need to fend off the bad things in the world, failure, loss, homelessness, being poor, being hungry. He developed a love for money. And I think when she died, a lot of that came about. I also didn't get the fact in the book, or the idea in the book, that he hated his nephew, because his sister died during childbirth. I don't even think that was a fact in the book, that any of that was a fact. I pretty much got the impression that once she died, he cared about nothing else other than money. And that developed more as he aged, and more as the other good things in his life left him. A funny thing about the book, in the narration I talked about, during the Ghosts of Christmas Present, when Scrooge was at his nephew's house, and he was watching them play games, the way it referred to people at that party made me smile. I didn't LOL, laugh out loud. It made me smile. It talked about Scrooge's nephew's sister, and Scrooge's nephew's sister's friend, and it was quoting Scrooge's nephew's sister's friend. I thought it was fun, and it was just another neat form of whimsy that Charles Dickens would put in the story. And I almost think to make a perfect movie, you would need to have narration throughout, because the narration in the story is what made it so great in the book. But as we go, here's another facsimile type version of the story, very similar to the last book I showed. This one is green, and it doesn't have a limitation page. Also, for some reason, I end up with these inscriptions. This one was given to somebody Christmas of 1978. I don't know if it was from mom and dad or anything like that, but it looks very, very similar. It's got all the same stuff. So I'm assuming, with the exception of the limitation page, it's got all the same stuff. So I've never seen a true first edition of this book before. Let's go back a little farther, see if I can find a cool image. I've never seen a true first edition copy of this book before, but I've got to imagine that there's a lot like this. The Last of the Spirits. Some more of that original artwork, facsimiled, faked. This one's called, it's not titled on there. just some neat artwork. And both of these have the built-in ribbon bookmark, the gold gilt page edges. This one's only on the top, but not on the front or the bottom. This one's the gilt all the way around. I feel guilty for all this gilt. Let's see, I also got Easton Press. This one, Easton Press, they make some cool classic books as well. I've gotten this one here in the mailbox this year, as you would expect with Easton Press, unattached book plate, just laying loose in here. They're neat end papers. Can you see that? Very typical for Easton Press, the 20-something karat gilt edges all the way around. And this one shows some different artwork. This is another really good one, Fezziwig's Ball. So there's the Easton Press. I like this one. They tend to run kind of expensive, over $100 on the secondary market, but nice books. There's something about in the book Scrooge's Redemption. A lot of the films have various ways that Christmas Day played out. The book, Scrooge woke up holding onto the newel post. The curtains were still there. He looked out the window, talked to the boy, asked him to get the prize turkey, and offered him some extra monies if he got back in 5 minutes, and things like that. He didn't have any servants. In fact, he was living in Marley's house. At least servants weren't mentioned. Maybe he had them, but they weren't mentioned in the book. He was living in Marley's house. So when Marley, his partner, Jacob Marley, died, Scrooge got his partner's house. A very big, wide staircase. And it was in a building with other businesses, so Scrooge also became landlord to these other businesses. But it never mentioned servants, so he's giddy as he said, I'm as happy as a schoolgirl, I'm as giddy as a drunken man. He didn't have any servants to scare out of their wits like he had in some of the movies and things like that. But when he was getting dressed, he was putting stuff on inside out, upside down, backwards, wrong things over the right things, and such as that. So it really painted that kind of picture where he was so happy he couldn't wait to get out, and getting dressed was almost too difficult for him to handle. But that last day, that Christmas Day in the story, he ordered the turkey. He walked around town. He went to church. He walked the town. Finally, that night, he went to his nephew's house. He was so nervous because he'd been putting him off practically his nephew's entire life. Been putting him off so much that when he got to Fred's door, he couldn't go in. He kept walking back and forth up and down the street, trying to get the courage to go knock on the door. When he knocked on the door, he was welcomed with open arms and enjoyed his evening there. And then the next morning, he made sure he went to work early, because he was kind of hoping in a way that Bob Cratchit would come into work late, which he did. Made merry on Christmas, like you see in all the movies. He made very merry on Christmas. And he did. He put on the show of being angry that he was fixing to fire Bob Cratchit. Fixing to fire. He was about to fire Bob Cratchit. In fact, Bob Cratchit grabbed, I think it was a shovel. He grabbed something. I can't remember what it was now. He grabbed something. He was about to attack. He was about to attack Scrooge, or defend himself against Scrooge with a weapon, when Scrooge finally told him, no, I'm giving you a raise, making you a partner, all this kind of stuff. And you get that happy ending. And it assures us, the book assures us, that Scrooge lived out his rest of his years holding Christmas dear, treating people well, being the kindest, best uncle that Tiny Tim ever knew, who grew healthy and stuff like that. So there are some differences between the book and the different variations of the movie. That's to be expected. Another version that I have of this book here, I have an older Folio Society edition of this. It comes with their typical type of what you expect from Folio. You expect a slipcase. Here's the spine of my book, and it's stuck. It's not stuck, it's just not coming out easily. Here's our cover. I love the front cover of this book. Here we've got some terrific end paper artwork. So if you want to talk about, can you see that? If you want to talk about a definitive Folio Society version, this one would be the one, although I do love the newer, more economically priced version of the book. This one here really picks up the pace on the artwork. You get a slipcase. This one is from 2003. And it's a third printing. This one printed in 2008. So what we got here, see if I can find some examples of the artwork, and they're very familiar. Very familiar to the other Folio Society edition that I just showed you. But I'm just skimming through. There are some color art pages in here as well. The art pages, and I'm going to sound stupid, but it's a glossier, shinier, slicker paper, and then the pages that the story is on are a flatter, thicker, very thick, heavy type of stock. I don't know how to demonstrate how thick it is, but it's thick paper. A short story that's made fat in a book, you're usually going to have thick paper and big typeset, large margins. See if there's any other artwork in here we can find really quickly. And there is a lot. Some neat color pictures, as well as the typical black and whites that we saw in the other edition here. See if I can find a couple more. There's a lot of pictures in here. An illustrated version, no doubt. The Ghost of Christmas Present. Yeah, come on. Got to find something else here. I got to find something else here. All right, this is the scene of the two ladies and the mortician's assistant, or the mortician. I think he's the mortician's assistant, hawking Scrooge's wares. That's another difference in the book. While that scene is there, and for the most part, the 1951 and the 1935 version quote it word for word as far as the dialogue goes. But one difference that I did notice is the merchant who's buying Scrooge's possessions that they stole from him after he died. The merchant went through first to the man. I think it was the mortician's assistant. He showed what he had, and the merchant wrote what he was going to pay for it on the wall. And then the next two ladies, he wrote theirs. And then the third, he said, "You were born to make your fortune." He never told how much he was going to pay them. The movie's always implied by telling you amounts that each one made more money by selling it. The book didn't tell you. It said he wrote their payments on the wall, and with the exception of the dollar amounts, it was pretty much word for word. I think 1951 Alistair Sim, I watched it immediately after finishing the book, same day, and I couldn't believe how the dialogue sounded exactly like what I'd read, except for the amounts. But some great movies, a very great story. If you're like me and you feel like you've seen enough of A Christmas Carol or Scrooge, if you've seen enough of the story by watching the movies, even if you're not a big fan of the movies, I strongly recommend reading Charles Dickens' story. It's a wonderful story, and it's the same story, but it feels different when you're reading it. And again, I told you before, I think the narration is what makes it. It makes it more of a whimsical tale, more of a happy story. It's hard to believe that it would be a happy story, as dark as it gets, before you get Scrooge's Redemption. But it kind of keeps you out of the dips and the depression. It keeps you up here by always reminding you this is a happy tale throughout. And Dickens, the language that Dickens uses, it's what do I say? It's a magical. I strongly recommend you read the book. It's very short. Doesn't take. I think I read it in a day, a couple sittings one day, and I was amazed how much I looked forward to reading on. I didn't want to stop, even though I knew the story back and forth. Sometimes when you feel like you know a story backwards and forth by watching a movie, you're hesitant to go read the book because I don't want to know what happens. But in this story, you're getting so much familiar stuff, but also so much different stuff. So much that's new, a different feeling to it, that it makes it worthwhile. So in closing, I strongly recommend watching every version of that movie you can find, but the 1935, 1951, and the George C. Scott version. It's in color. I don't remember the date, 70s, 80s, I don't know. The George C. Scott version, I strongly recommend. I'll watch those three every year, guaranteed. And I'll watch others also mixed in here and there, but I'll watch those guaranteed. I also recommend watching the Alistair Sim version 1951, watching it in black and white because it's readily available in color, but then watching it in color. It feels different. When you add the color to it, it's almost like watching a different movie. It feels different for sure. So that's my take. I'd really love to get a truly amazing, definitive, limited edition version of that story. And Mr. Suntup, if you're listening, I'm sure you're not, but if you have even any inkling of it, the Terrific is asking, please make that. I definitely would want that. A Suntup Editions version of Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol would be perhaps my favorite, at least one of my favorite Suntup editions, and I would definitely buy in at least a number, at least an artist edition. But anyway, hook a brother up if you don't mind. And that's I can't think of any more lies to tell. A great story. Merry Christmas. Happy all the different things. Happy December 25th. Merry December 25th. Happy New Year, and the boy always tells me, like and subscribe. Please do. C'est la vie, baby. Thank you.